gotta rewind the clocks a little bit because there's a rumor that I disregarded because it was from super duper iffy Digitimes, and now we're getting it from another source, which instantly increases the likelihood of it happening, but it also happens to be a reliable source at that. So now we're talking about the potential of Apple reusing the current MacBook Pro 13-inch design for the M2 chip. Let's begin. Of course, I'm most excited about this leak because it means that the TouchBar lives another day. By far, probably the biggest feature I'm missing on my current MacBook Pro, and I know, before you will all start pointing and laughing, I don't care what any of you think. I used a MacBook Pro with a TouchBar for over a year, and I loved it. I thought it was cool. I used predictive text, I used the volume slider, I used the picture-in-picture button when watching YouTube. It never crashed for me, which is weird because there's a ton of people that always say it froze and crashed on them. I think they're all liars and they're conspiring together to fight me because they don't like how logical the TouchBar truly was. But if there was one thing I could change about my current MacBook Pro, adding back the TouchBar would absolutely be it. And I know, as small of a demographic as it is, there is a few of you out there watching that were big fans of the TouchBar and were sad to see it go away. If the M2 chip is going to refresh the 13-inch MacBook Pro, and according to this source, which Mac Rumors has had in the past, this is the exact same source that told us that the new MacBook Pros last year were going to have a notch, which a lot of people doubted and a lot of people thought was insane and there was no way of it happening, and that leaker ended up being correct. They're now coming forward again with more kind of boring leaks, which I should preface. Whenever there's a leak or a rumor that's not that interesting, that's not that exciting, something like, hey, by the way, this new MacBook Pro is going to have a notch, or hey, by the way, there's a new MacBook Pro coming out in a month, but it's going to look exactly the same as the current generation MacBook Pro, just with a new chip. It makes me feel like they're not lying as much. It's not the kind of leak that you would make up to get attention. You know, it's one thing to say, yeah, well, Apple glasses are coming out tomorrow, or oh yeah, the foldable iPhone is launching next week, because you know that's going to drive a lot of clicks and that's going to get a lot of attention. When someone comes forward and says, hey, they're not doing anything with the design, they're just gonna throw a new chip in there. Yeah, that sounds believable. It sounds like Apple. That's kind of a running theme that could go with the March event if there does end up being one, because that would mean iPhone SE, same design, new chip. Same thing with the iPad Air 5, same design, new chip. The weird part about this report is that they're alluding to the idea that there will be no design changes at all with this 13-inch MacBook Pro, which of all the machines Apple's had on the website, we all kind of thought that one is the one that's due for the most, like, updates, right? Like, we got MagSafe and the SD card slot and HDMI, all those legacy ports and stuff brought to the new MacBook Pros. Shouldn't the 13-inch model get some of those ports? Or maybe mini LED, or maybe, you know, the full-size function keys like its bigger brothers? But no, this leaker is claiming exact same design, no changes, just a silicon upgrade, which I feel like it's kind of weird to have a MacBook Pro refresh after the 14-inch and 16-inch models and it still won't have MagSafe. But I'm happy for the enthusiasts of the world that are like diehard TouchBar fans, and now they get a CPU and GPU boost and they get to keep the TouchBar for another couple years. Probably not exciting for those of you out there who hate the TouchBar, which I understand are most of you. Congratulations. Apple agrees that their marvelous, innovative product was not worth it. But I do think while the spring event does sound particularly boring because it means we're not getting any new designs and it's just new silicon coming out, let's look at the bright side here for a second, as most people in polls have all voted that the Apple silicon transition is probably the most exciting thing going on in Apple right now. iPhones and iPads, yeah, okay, they get a little bit better. But finding out about these new chips and how much better Apple silicon can be than Intel, that's definitely a lot more interesting, especially as a bunch of Intel fans love sending me Geekbench tests about how, well, this generation is a little bit faster than M1 and consumes 4 times the power, so that's cool, right? No, it literally isn't. Also, I don't care about Intel anymore because it's not going to be any more Apple products, so I'm not going to be able to use those CPUs unless I start trying Windows laptops, and I don't want to try that again. So the bright side of the story is that the M2 chip might be ready. It might be in mass production right now if this source ends up being correct, which they have in the past. That means more speed tests, and we can see what kind of improvement to expect year over year when transitioning from the M1 to the M2 chip, right? Like we saw M1 Pro and M1 Max is what happens when you just stuff some more high performance cores and you increase the power draw a bit and you double up on the GPU core options. This time the M2 chip is rumored to still have the same 4 high performance cores, 4 efficiency cores, and this time just like 10 GPU cores instead of 8. Will the overall power draw be less? You know, can the M2 chip get faster and more efficient simultaneously? Or will it be such a minor update, you know, it's kind of like going from the A14 to the A15 chip, where it's like, yeah, there's a lot of under the hood changes with neural cores and that type of thing, but it practically just results in, oh, here's some new camera features that we can now do. You don't have those camera features to fall back on with M1 to M2. The webcam is still going to be a potato at the end of the day, so this new trajectory of Apple Silicon, I think, is what I'm more excited for. Obviously, it would be great at this event if we could get a new Mac Mini with the M1 Pro or M1 Max, but depending on if they add enough Thunderbolt controllers to the M2 chip, I could easily see them just updating the Mac Mini with the M2 and just say like, well, it's faster than before, and because of these new Thunderbolt controllers, we can give you the full 4 Thunderbolt ports on the back, and then we can scrap that crappy Intel Mac Mini off the face of the earth. That would be the way to go, in my view, because I definitely think you're not going to sell as many iMac Pros if you can get the M1 Pro and M1 Max in a Mac Mini. Most people are probably going to opt for that if it's a whole lot cheaper, but I'm curious how you guys feel about Apple keeping around that 13-inch MacBook Pro design for another year or so. How much longer does the Touch Bar actually have? It might end up surviving a bit more than we originally thought, which is kind of cool. And I'm not saying everyone should have the Touch Bar. All I'm saying is that if at checkout I could have a $300 add-on, I would pay it. I would pay the $300 just to have my emoji picker and picture-in-picture buttons and all the great things the Touch Bar allowed for. Shut up about your Touch Bar complaints. I don't care. All your predictions, feel free to let me know what you're thinking down below. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you all in the next one.